Hey everybody, this is Mark with Beyond Profit, a global perspective. In the last video, we did a primer on Marxism in about 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. That was pretty fast. And in it, we went into some core assumptions about what Marxists argue about power and inequality in the economic system. In this video, we are going to apply those principles to global trade. And we're going to ask a tough question. That is, does comparative advantage work the way we think it works, the way we expect it to work? Or does it just reinforce patterns of exploitation? And we're going to be answering that question right now. If you're interested in global strategy, international political economy, and how these ideas actually play out in the international system and the real world, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. That way it helps grow the channel and allows us to carry on the conversation. Now, before we get into this, I have to issue a little disclaimer. I posted a version of this video that's still floating around on YouTube about 15 years ago. I actually have been talking about this stuff since 1999, and the material that it's drawn from is a lot older than that. Sadly, what I'm about to share with you is probably just as relevant today as it will be in 20 years. So if you're thinking this video is old and dated, you might think twice and just double check, because some of it might still absolutely be valid. The last class, we discussed the central problem of globalization, right? How are we treating our most vulnerable people? Up to this point in this class, we've been focusing mostly on making money or government trying to control your operations and through mercantilism. But for a while, we've sort of been tiptoeing around this idea that, oh, by the way, there's people in these businesses too, and maybe we should talk about that. So Marxism argues that free trade and comparative advantage generate wealth efficiently, but result in disparity. If you look at comparative advantage over time, that is the accumulation, what tends to happen is a rich-poor gap emerges. So yes, it's awesome, everybody makes more money, but there's a lot of disparity between the rich and the poor that naturally happens. This produces a number of short-term negative consequences, but may lead to positive social change in the long term. Marx argues that the rich and powerful exploit the poor and the weak, leading to violence. The political system will fall apart unless the workers and the less economically powerful are assimilated into the economic system. If you are exploited for so long and disconnected from the economic system, not able to make money, not able to get yourself ahead, that's a potentially explosive and violent situation. And the possibility of this happening, that is workers getting together and sort of taking up their guns and trying to overthrow things violently, that's a long shot. It's structurally unlikely given current trade relationships, and may only happen over time, through revolution or evolution. So, in other words, these workers, they're too busy, right? They don't have time. They don't have the resources. They don't have the weapons. They don't have the ability to connect in such a way that they're going to overthrow people who are wealthier in this system. Again, a lot of people sort of talk about Marxism as being this kind of utopian ideology, right? I don't think any of this stuff is very utopian. It's either realistic or dystopian, I guess. But I don't know. You can tell me if it makes sense to you. There are a couple of thinkers, Emanuel Wallerstein and Johann Galtung, who came up with some theories, world system theory and imperialist theory. They are not purely Marxists, but they are people who argue things from a Marxist point of view. And what I'm about to share with you is sort of an articulation of their theory. Their bit is a little more complicated than this, but I think this is a good way to sort of illustrate this, because it's the way that Marx probably would characterize the relations between countries in the world and just sort of extend everything we've talked about to an international level. They basically argue that there's two kinds of states in the world. There are core states and there are peripheral states. Core states are basically kind of the elite, the rich, the wealthy, the democratic countries in the world that really dominate the international system. And the peripheral states are the everybody else. So you got a core state and a peripheral state. But there is a core and a periphery inside each of those states. So if you take the core, for example, you have the government, multinational corporations. In a core country, those are like usually democratic entities. And you have multinational corporations and very, very wealthy people who are running businesses, and they tend to be the rich and the powerful. Our periphery is the everybody else. Voters and consumers, professional blue-collar workers, people like you and me, right? We express our power through voting, not so much the exercise of massive amounts of money, but we are consumers. And so that also sort of like we vote with the money that we spend. Now, the core and the periphery in this peripheral state is different. So most of the time, a core in one of these peripheral states is probably going to be run by a dictator, probably a landed elite. So a lot of times there's still agrarian, land is still a really important commodity, and it's owned usually just by a handful of people. The military oftentimes has a really strong role to play in the core, where the military isn't just like this powerful entity with weapons, but they own a lot of businesses too. So like take the case of Egypt, for example. Like in Egypt, the Egyptian military owns most of the businesses in that country. And then there may be other affiliated businesses and factories and so on that also have power among their elite, right? And then you have the everybody else in their country, but their everybody else is not like ours. They don't have voting rights. They don't have maybe as much money to spend as we do on a day-to-day basis. Poor, landless, agricultural laborers, urban laborers, that makes up the periphery of the periphery. Okay, so we got all the actors straight, right? So then the question is, how do these different entities interact with each other? How does our core relate to our periphery? Well, the core leaders, these people over here, they satisfy people like us with cheap import prices and a strong economy. As long as we're growing, as long as my gas prices are cheap, as long as I got cheap Nikes to purchase, right, then I'm going to be pretty happy. Give me some Netflix and some sporting events, and as long as my inflation's not high, I'm not going to worry about being politically involved. I'm just going to kind of go along for the ride because these people are satisfying me. They're making it okay. And the government, generally speaking, has supported globalization and free trade and specialization because it does make the consumer population happy. It's just that there's a few people on the periphery who maybe, have trouble. They get laid off. There's problems. There's issues, right? But as long as the economy is generally good, the periphery doesn't have any reason to revolt or even question authority. In fact, honestly, we don't even have time to think about revolt because most of us are working so many hours and going to school and doing all the stuff we do day to day, taking care of family and watching sports that we're not following this that much. It's like we're busy. And it's not like it's some conspiracy between government and multinational corporations. It's like multinationals want to make the money, and the government's happy because that makes the economy go well, which means I'm going to keep getting elected. You don't have to get into a dark, smoky room to figure that out. It's just they've got the same interests. The next question is then, how does the core of the core state relate to the core of the peripheral state? The core of the core, that's these guys, they offer investment, kickbacks, and security to these people down here. Hey, we've got a company that wants to expand, or we want to outsource here. You got factories, you got cheap labor, you got cheap land. What can we get from you? Can we go down there and take advantage of that stuff so we can continue to sell cheap Nikes up and satisfy these guys? And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll make some money. What's it worth to you? And they're like, okay, well, maybe we'll pay you some money. If you want to put your business into another country, especially a peripheral country, you want to make sure that they're safe and secure. So if you're operating a factory, you don't want supply lines to be held up. You don't want there to be any slowdowns. Or maybe, what do we really need in order to make this work? Well, if we're in a situation where we're exploiting super low wages, and these workers maybe are going to go on strike or get upset or have food riots or whatever, then we need more security. This core, our core, is going to offer money, sometimes in the form of military aid or training or whatever, to support this government, to potentially support their security forces to try to control that. So these guys then are ready with their guns to shoot at the laborers if the laborers are getting out of control for the benefit of the businesses that we're setting down there in order to take advantage of the cheap labor. How do the core of the periphery and the periphery of the periphery relate? These guys benefit because they're like, hey, we got jobs for you. Come on, poor folks running into cities. You can work in our factories. Yeah, I know there's sweatshops and everything, but hey, we've got some jobs. We've even got some dorms for you to stay in. So they offer low-wage jobs to those who cooperate, and the periphery faces violence or starvation for revolting or questioning authority. If you protest, we'll just send in the troops, man. We'll take care of this. The police can handle that situation, and sometimes violently. So that such is the nature of many peripheral states. Finally, what's the relationship between these two peripheries? That's the us and the poorest of the poor down here. And the answer is, we really don't have common interests. It's like, we're down here, we're being oppressed, we're getting shot at, we're being put in jail, we're being fired and replaced by scabs, you name it. Like, we're in a tight spot here. Please help us. And those of us that are in the periphery of the core, we're like, sorry, busy, working our jobs, watching TV. If they're the ones who are providing my cheap food or my cheap clothes, the products that make it easy for me to sort of live in the society that I'm living in, why do I want to undo that situation when it benefits me? When we're the ones who want the cheap Nikes and they're the ones producing the cheap Nikes, we don't care. We're not paying attention. We don't want to do anything about it because it's good for us. And we don't want to know about it. It upsets us, man. We hear about these bad things happening in other countries, but we don't think about it very often until that commercial comes on and we want to change the channel and we don't want to know about it. And even if you did, you guys are being worked hard enough. It's like, what are you going to do? Get on your internet and chase down every purchased product that you got that comes from some other country? It sucks, but this is the situation that we're in here. Okay, we're not well off enough to figure that out. Plus, how easy would it be to figure that stuff out on the internet anyway? Like, what? How do we pursue that? How do we make that happen? What these Marxist scholars describe as sort of a structure which creates a pattern of unfair and unequal trade that ultimately victimizes the people down here the most. And we all sort of profit on the back of these people's sweat and labor. Now, I will put an asterisk on that in that the technology, changing technology, has changed that equation somewhat. So now it's possible through things like GoFundMe, or even just like the technology of cell phones just being able to connect with each other, that sometimes in developing countries they have been able to connect to wealthy donors from other countries to support their movements. Does anybody remember the Arab Spring? I think it was 2012. So we had this Arab Spring, right? And then we've got people protesting in Tahrir Square, and they got these things, they're called cell phones, and they get on Facebook, and they're, linking money, and there's people from the developed West giving money to these protesters who are upset about their situation, and they're able to monetize that, they are able to mobilize people. What happened to the Arab Spring? I don't know, man, like some military dictator took over in Egypt, things fell apart in Algeria. That's the problem, is that this is a great tool, and there's potential for a confluence of interest between both sets of peripheries. But if these guys continue to crush these guys, then it's really, really hard for them to have the incentive to take advantage of that at times. And as long as we benefit from this arrangement, then it gets hard. There's one reason why, again, Marx isn't looking at this specific model when he's talking about it, but it's like this, where the idea of revolution just becomes very, very unlikely. Exploitation is likely to continue. Marx, if he were to stand here today, he would say this is very unjust, and so workers of the world unite. He would also say it's really hard for workers of the world to unite. And this is why. Even now, under modern circumstances where money can traverse borders a whole lot easier than they ever could, it's still not enough to really fundamentally change the system to break out of something like this. This is the Marxist critique. They say this is what the world looks like, and this is what's wrong with the world. And this is the story that the liberals aren't going to tell you. And this is a story that the mercantilists, well, we'll put it this way. The liberals don't think it works like this, and the mercantilists think it does and wouldn't want to tell you about it because they benefit from it.
So what do we do with this? I asked the same question after giving this presentation to students just the other day, and they were silent. They kind of just threw up their hands. And I can't say that I blame them. This Marxist theory, especially looked through the lens of world systems theory and imperialist theory, really challenges the assumption that trade is naturally fair, mutually beneficial, or driven purely by efficiency. Instead, it argues that power in politics shape outcomes just as much, if not more, than markets do. Now, that doesn't mean that this model is entirely correct,
But it's also something we can't ignore. When you look at global supply chains and labor problems, labor conditions, you may understand why this perspective continues to resonate. Here's the question I want to leave you with. Is global trade really a system of opportunity, or is it structured inequality and exploitation? And maybe more importantly, if the system works the way that we think it does, is meaningful change even possible? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.